Hello folks, this is Dan Watson, Certified Lubrication Specialist from the Lube Page with another edition of the Lube Page. Now you know in our previous video we discussed base stocks. Those are important to know what base stocks are and what we're talking about when we use that term. Today we're going to move into what's the purpose in making these lubricants, because what are we trying to accomplish? And what do I mean by that? Well, it's kind of simple. If you were going to build a cart for your lawn to haul stuff around in, well, the first thing you'd say is, well, how much am I going to haul? And that might determine what size wheels I'm going to put on it. And will I be able to pull it myself, or I need to pull it with a tractor? So considerations for what you want the end product to be. What do you want that wagon to do? And how are you going to accomplish it? Same thing when we build in automobiles. I build a car simply for transportation. Maybe it's a sedan, 4 doors, got people in it. But what if I want a truck to haul around a couple of tons? Well, I have to now change what I'm going to do in order to get the finished product that I want. So when we get into lubrication, we really have to know what we're trying to do with these lubricants. What do we want the end product to be? And therefore, I have to know what are the functions of a lubricant. Functions. What can it do? What am I expecting it to do? We refer to those as functions. So let's get down to it. When it comes to lubricating oils, fluids, or products, the number one thing that we are trying to achieve is we're trying to reduce friction. Well, there it is. So what is friction? If we're trying to reduce it, what is it? Well, friction is a really easy concept to understand. If I take 2 pieces of anything, let's say 2 pieces of wood, and I take those 2 pieces of wood and I basically press them together and then I move them. The resistance to movement created by the surface interaction between the 2 pieces of wood, that's friction. So friction is that force which opposes the movement of 2 surfaces when they are pressed against each other. That's basic friction. Okay. Now, friction always produces heat, and friction, when it comes to certain things, can produce wear. We'll talk about that in a minute. But we want to reduce friction because when I'm trying to accomplish something and I'm moving 2 metal surfaces or 2 any kind of surfaces within contact with each other, the energy it takes to move that will be directly proportional to the friction between the 2 objects. So it makes sense that what I want to do is reduce the amount of energy that it takes me to do that. So reducing friction gives me much greater freedom of motion, freedom of movement between these 2 elements that are being pressed against each other. Makes sense, right? Easy concept. Now, friction can be reduced or virtually eliminated by maintaining some type of fluid that separates the 2 moving parts. If the 2 moving parts can't touch each other, then they can't have friction because they're not engaging each other. So one of the first things to understand in lubrication, it actually has a term called full fluid lubrication, but it means that I've got enough liquid between these 2 surfaces that they have no chance of touching each other. Now that would be frictionless movement. There are some other considerations that we could get into, but that would be virtually friction-free movement. Now, the problem is that depending upon the pressure I push each one of those metal plates with, as they would press that fluid in the middle, the more trouble the fluid has in staying in place and separating the 2 metal objects. Okay, so we could get back down to where we got some friction. So fluid separation, it's ideal, but we usually have to put in some additives in order to accomplish real frictionless movement over a large number of applications. Now, if we reduce friction, we also reduce wear. Let me hit this real quick. You look at the surface of a piece of metal, looks very smooth to you. It simply is not. you put it under a 4x or 6x or 8x magnification, and what you'll see is it looks like little, they're called asperities, but it looks like a rough surface, like you got these little tiny granular surface sticking up like little peaks, okay? And that's the surface machined down the best it can. Now, obviously ceramic surfaces and other things that they come up with and coatings can reduce that irregular surface, but for the best machining we can do with metals, we've still got these things there. Now, what happens is that when we reduce the film of lubricant thin enough that these asperities start to run into each other, they break the little tips off, and that's called metal wear, okay? So we're trying to prevent wear with lubrication. So again, we want to maintain that film level, or as we'll talk about in another video, have some additives that will help us maintain that situation. We have to use lubricants as coolants. In other words, when you have gears that interface with each other and other moving parts, when they trap oil in between the teeth of the gears, they raise it to high pressure. And when that oil is raised to high pressure, it gets hot. Any liquid put under pressure gets hot. So we're going to have heat being generated by the movement of the components that are within the internal combustion engine, and any other application, hydraulic application, hydraulic pumps, anything, it creates heat. So we use the lubricant as a heat transfer medium to transfer that heat away from the source and off to some other place, whether it's an air cooler or water cooler like a radiator. We need sealing from lubricants. In other words, a lot of times you'll have openings, slight openings that the seal itself can't completely cover. So what happens is the little film of oil forms the last bit of the seal. And why do we need that? Well, it prevents foreign matter such as dust and particles from entering into the lubrication application, which can eventually cause abrasive wear. We need our lubricants to be additized in such a way that they prevent rust and corrosion. Now, regular oil will do that, but remember, if you have too much moisture, the oil will float on top of the moisture, so the moisture will push the oil away from the surface of the metal, and now you have water on the surface of the metal, and as everybody knows, that'll create rust, okay? So you'd use, again, certain additives to assist the oil in being a rust and corrosion inhibitor. And then hydraulic fluid. We may use some of our engine oil, motor oil, or other types of oil, actually be using it in a hydraulic application. Hydraulics just means that I'm using fluid to transmit energy, okay? So in a hydraulic system, we're using the oil, but that oil is also in there for anti-wear for the gears and the pumps and the sliding of the valves and all things that operate in that system. So it is doing two functions. It's functioning as a fluid to transfer energy and power, and it's also working as an anti-wear product. Last thing we'll talk about for general lubricants is the life. I can't make these products when I have a finished product that is, and its function is that it lasts for 3 days. We have to make lubricants that will last at least for a specified period of time, because otherwise it just becomes impossible to keep up with constantly changing the fluid in order to meet these objectives and these functions. So one of the things I have to stick in as a required function of a lubricating oil or hydraulic oil is that I can make this in such a way that it'll have some type of lifetime other than just a very short, I'm here today and gone tomorrow, okay? Now, knowing the general functions, I wanted to talk to you about the functions of motor oil. You say, well, aren't those the same? Yeah, but there's more. See, when we tailor a lubricant to an application, what that means is I'm going to make a motor oil, and it's going to be different than when I make a hydraulic oil or than when I make a gear oil, okay, or a transmission oil. All right, so I'm just going to go over the functions for motor oil, and you'll see what I mean. Okay, again, it has to reduce friction. We talked about that. It has to reduce wear. Again, same thing. It has to serve as a coolant. And by the way, in an internal combustion engine, about 40% of the heat generated in the engine it's transferred out by the oil. Now eventually that goes to either an oil cooler, or the oil releases its heat in the water jacket around the head that goes to the radiator. But it picks up about 40% of the heat of the engine that it transfers out and has to then transfer through another medium. Sealing, yeah, it's very important in an internal combustion engine. The ring seal is paramount to having a powerful engine that functions. A good ring seal means that you have good combustion pressures in the cylinder. If you start to lose the ring seal, you'll start to have blow-by going into the crankcase, and you'll have less combustion pressure, which means you'll have less horsepower and less production. Now, it's got to prevent corrosion and rust. We know that, and this is the only thing that'll do it inside the engine in those parts that are not part of the coolant system. Remember, the coolant system is a separate part, and it has its own antifreeze and things to prevent corrosion, but the rest of the inside of the engine, the oil is the only thing there to help it prevent corrosion. And you do have a lot of condensation in the engine during normal operation, shut down at night. If the dew forms on the window, the dew forms in the engine. Hydraulic fluid, we know that inside the engine there are hydraulic lifters. The oil's being used right there. And in modern diesel engines, there are incredibly high performance injectors that use a portion of motor oil in a hydraulic function. Okay, so the motor oil is forced to be used as a hydraulic function because it's the oil that's available. Now, life of the lubricants in an internal combustion engine, we have to design the oil so that it can withstand call it the rigors or the bombardment of the byproducts of internal combustion engine. Everything from sulfuric acid to nitric acid. We have oxidation going on because of the contamination of moisture and iron particles, which contribute to oxidizing agents, which then cause oxidation in the oil. So we really have to work hard to extend the life and make sure these motor oils can last, because those internal combustion engines just beat them up with byproducts of combustion. It's a simple process, so you have to additize the oil again, which we're going to talk about in another one. And then inside the engine, you have these things called deposits. Now, you may have heard of terms like sludge, varnish, and then there's additional deposits, hard carbon deposits that will form. Well, we have to, again, we'll get back to this thing, which I'm going to do a whole video on, of additizing the oil so that it will be able to reduce sludging and varnish. And the base stock is critical when we get into sludge and varnish, which we'll talk about that, how that functions when we get to formulating oil. Now, one last thing on the additional function of motor oil is that it has to aid in the starting of the internal combustion engine in very cold weather. Remember, that oil, if it gets really cold and it won't move very easy, then it means it's like that engine's trying to start up in pudding, and hard for that little starter to get that engine turning over in very thick oil. So we have to be concerned that one of the functions of motor oil is to ease starting in cold weather, ease the startup of the engine, not make it harder, but make it easier because of good lubrication. So again, these functions, they are what we're going to have to build this lubricant into. And we're going to do it by using certain base stocks and additives to end up with a finished product. Now, in our next video, I'll go into the additives that make it possible to accomplish these functions, and the difference in the ability of a petroleum base stock versus a synthetic base stock to enhance these functions or have trouble effectively achieving these functions. So that's it for today. I would remind you that I do these videos as a service, but I am also in the business. I am an AMSOIL dealer. I've been an AMSOIL dealer for 33 years. And so if you have any need of synthetic oils or curious about synthetic oils and have questions, then all you have to do is go to the lube page, and you can contact me there or direct Dan Watson at thelubepage.com. That's Dan Watson at thelubepage.com. So until next time, just keep moving, keep your car lubricated, and I'll see you next time.